some just examples of what we've learned, concrete examples. Well, first we learned how to jibe, how to do a controlled jibe, how to control the 36-foot boom and the 900 square feet of sail through a jibe. One jibing trick we learned from a catboat friend was something called a wet jibe, where you leave the main sheet cleated, and as you haul in the sail, you throw the excess main sheet over the transom, and it causes a big loop that trails behind the boat. And then as the sail crosses the wind and fills away on the other jibe, you release the main sheet and get out of the way, and the resistance of the main sheet getting dragged through the water causes the sail to just slowly come out on the new jibe and fill away. So it's a nice trick. It helps when you have 200 feet of main sheet. Another thing that we've learned a lot about sailing a catboat with just this one gigantic sail is how to balance the boat. With a sloop or any boat that has more than one sail, you could trim the headsail and release the mainsail, and the boat's going to want to bear away. Or conversely, you pull in the mainsail and luff the jib, and the boat will want to turn up into the wind. With a catboat, you don't really have that luxury, or so I thought when we first started sailing. But it turns out there's some interesting things you can do with the catboat rig to do just the same. If you release the peak halyard on a gaff-rigged boat, all of a sudden, and if you release it a lot, all of a sudden your sail gets cut in half. And now you just have a small triangle that goes from the gaff out to the clew at the back of the sail and into the tack. And it turns out that portion of the sail, the center of effort, or that portion is much further forward. So that's the same as pulling in your jib and releasing the main sheet in a sloop rig boat. And you can kind of do and to get the boat to head up. Well, it's a catboat; she always wants to head up into the wind, so that's not an issue. But balancing the boat out with the peak halyard also works in sort of smaller increments. To depower the boat going upwind, you can ease the peak halyard a couple feet, and that ends up working similar to pulling a backstay on a modern boat. It ends up twisting off the top of the sail, and that top part of the sail twists off and spills some wind, and it's a good way to depower. That's something that we learned, thrashing to windward in 18 knots. We can just ease the peak halyard a little bit, and the boat will kind of settle down. Another interesting technique that we've learned was something we call a hockey stop on board, and we learned this coming into the mooring here in Bristol Harbor. The typical afternoon sea breeze in Bristol. We come screaming in on a dead run, and we need to stop right at our mooring. Well, with the board all the way up, if you jam the helm over really hard, the boat ends up doing this hockey stop maneuver. And actually, the contrary is also true. If you're trying to turn, say make it through a tack, and you have the board all the way up, you may not ever end up making it through the tack. So if you need to tack or chicken jibe maybe when it's windy and you're not going to jibe and you need to tack the boat around, you got to make sure to put the board all the way down so you can make it through the tack. There's some other things we've learned is just judging her momentum, of course. I guess maybe now's a good time to say that the boat doesn't have an engine, and one thing that we've learned was sailing a boat without an engine actually makes you a better sailor, I think. There was a time when I was single-handing her through Woods Hole with a nice northwesterly. I scooted through without any issues until I was almost through to Vineyard Sound and the breeze died. And there I was kind of wallowing around doing circles in the current and trying with one eye on the chart and one eye looking at the sail to avoid any rocks. And everything was okay until the ferry comes in from the vineyard. Now, at this point, at that point, you really got to learn how to use every little bit of wind to get you out of harm's way. So that was a lesson learned that if I had an engine, I probably would have turned it on before I even got to Woods Hole to get me through, and I never would have learned those little tricks to get the boat going in almost no wind to get out of the way. So that's something else we've learned. Well, A lot of people ask, well, hey, aren't catboats slow? Well, some of them are, but not necessarily. Modern catboats are all cruising cats, and like any cruising boat, speed is sacrificed for comfort. You know, they're also all auxiliary cats, and one thing you see if you look at the catboat designs over time, as soon as the internal combustion engine hits in the early 1900s, all of a sudden the booms on the catboats get chopped way down, and actually, and so, you know, there's less sail area, and then the centerboards often get moved forward in order to accommodate the engine, and that throws off the balance of the cat quite a bit. So, some catboats are slow, but sticking to an original design and one without an engine seems to show that the boats don't have to be slow. And I'll talk a little bit about racing here. One of Kathleen's first big races was the Opera House Cup in 2009, and the Opera House Cup is a classic wooden boat regatta held out in Nantucket. So a friend and I had a really spectacular cruise out to Nantucket. We were just kind of happy to be there amongst all these big boats. I'd never done much handicap racing, so they handed me the scratch sheet that morning, and it didn't really make that much sense to me. But we decided to go out and sail around the course and see what happens. On elapsed time, we thought Kathleen sailed quite well. She rolled over a Concordia yawl on the reach leg, and held even with a Halsey Herreshoff Newport 29 and a Nathaniel Herreshoff designed Buzzards Bay 25 throughout the race. Here's another nice shot of her from that event. Now, as far as corrected time, as it turns out, there had been 2 other 28-foot catboats that raced for the Opera House Cup and a few years previous to Kathleen. And these were both cruising cats, and neither were built primarily for speed. I suspect that those 2 boats, both owners are friends of ours, by the way, I think they both laid the groundwork for the favorable rating that were received. So on corrected time, Kathleen won by an embarrassing 33 minutes, while the rest of the fleet was separated by only a few minutes. So it was quite a surprise to many that a catboat was winning this prestigious event, and it was really a great day for catboaters to know that they aren't all slow. So it turns out that I'm not the only one that thought to bring back a racing catboat from the past. Silent Maid, shown here, was launched in 2009 as a replica of the famous B-class catboat from Barnegat Bay. Designed by Francis Swiesguth and originally built in 1924 for the yachting historian Edwin Schodel. The original Silent Maid represents a bit of an evolution in the racing catboat design. She has, relative to Kathleen, she has a taller, higher aspect sail plan. She's got a stayed rig, and you see she's a more representative of the look of a New Jersey cat with some longer overhangs. But at 33 feet with 900 square feet of sail, she's an impressive boat, and also has an interesting historical story. So in terms of racing, I have to discuss the summer of 2010 and our series of races with Silent Maid. As part of sort of an outreach tour, Silent Maid would be cruising the New England waters that summer, and thanks to instigator Bad Bob Reddington from the Catboat Association, a summer-long series of match races were held between these 2 new giant racing catboats. The series was, interesting on many levels, but you had a purebred Cape Cod catboat pitted against a New Jersey type with longer overhangs, a stayed rig, a more modern boat for sure, and certainly faster, at least on paper. So it was going to be an interesting series. The first race was held at the annual Wickford Catboat Rendezvous, and pretty quickly off the start, Silent Maid showed superior speed in the mid-range conditions, and on the upwind leg extended and went on to win the race by several minutes. So it looked like it might be a long summer for the crew of Kathleen. Race 2 was held in Padenarum at Marshall Marine's annual Catboat Rendezvous. This is in Buzzards Bay. It was the home turf for a boat like Kathleen. Despite falling way behind in the race, there was a big mistake made by Silent Maid in allowing Kathleen to catch up on the very last leg and steal a victory, as I described it, through no fault of our own. But the finish of that race inspired a marine artist and catboat owner Peter Argenbaugh to paint this beautiful painting of the two boats coming into the finish in Padenarum. Well, with the series tied at 1 race apiece, the next matchup was at the annual Aries Pond Catboat Gathering out in Pleasant Bay in Chatham, where close to 100 catboats gather. In the race, Kathleen held a lead on a long downwind leg to the first mark, but was then passed going back upwind to the finish. Some say an ingenious tactic, I called it desperate, had Kathleen sail through some very shallow water with the board coming up and down over every rock. That was, we had to look out on the bow calling for rocks, and the board would come up over the rock and drop back down over the next one. Well, with that maneuver, we managed to gain just enough ground to make it a sprint to the finish, and we sailed through the narrows of the two pleasant bays, and there's actually a cheering crowd as we sailed through there. The race was neck and neck for a tense 5 minutes, but eventually Kathleen was able to just barely pinch off Silent Maid and sail on to the victory with the Maid stuck in her wind shadow.